Hi everyone. So in these notes, we're going to review a concept called bone remodeling, which is a very critical physiological process. So when we go through these notes by covering bone remodeling, you really want to ask yourself why regulation of calcium in our bones versus our blood is so important and how bone remodeling is regulated in order to achieve those ends. In these notes, we're going to end up reviewing vocabulary related to these situations. And here we go. Okay, so what is bone remodeling? So you basically know what remodeling a house is like, in that you're removing parts of the house and you're adding new house or new parts back in, so your house looks shiny and newer, and hopefully parts of it start to work better. That's similar to what bone remodeling is. You're removing bone and eventually you're going to replace it with newer bone. This whole trade of bone, where you're removing it and replacing it, the reason why you're fundamentally doing this is because you're actually focused on trading calcium between your blood and bones. Whenever you need more calcium in your blood, you're going to break down your bone, and whenever you have too much calcium in your blood, you're going to build up your bones. That's the idea. Generally speaking, your bone's shape is maintained. It just might have a little bit more pits or be a little bit more weak, but it's not getting longer, it's not getting wider during this process. What may happen though is if you kind of keep removing calcium, the strength of the bone matrix may weaken over time. Hopefully that doesn't happen though, especially if you're doing exercise and maintaining a good diet. Now, what ends up happening is, because you're doing bone remodeling constantly through your life, eventually all the spongy bone in any given bone is completely replaced every 3 to 4 years. And all the compact bone is completely replaced every 10 years. So the process of how that works is very similar to how appositional growth works. But instead of growing your bones wider, you're really just maintaining, all right? So appositional growth, if you recall from when we went over elongation and widening of the bones, is the process of just packing on bone to existing bone. And in this case, what's happening is you're chewing down the surface of your bone with osteoclasts. But with bone remodeling, you're basically just patching up that hole in your bone later on if there's more calcium available. And so, okay, you use the osteoclast to chew down your bones when you need calcium, and then later on you got more calcium, then you can activate osteoblasts to build up your bone and patch in that hole, and then eventually those osteoblasts convert to osteocytes and they just maintain the existing bone until maybe later on you need calcium again. That's the idea. So we're constantly releasing calcium, and then when there's a lot more calcium available, you're going to pack that back into your bone. All right, so fundamentally then, bones, while they are critical for supporting your body and protecting your body, they're more critical as a storage tank for calcium. All right? Now, there can be side effects if your blood calcium level and your calcium is off, constantly off. Okay? So if you have too much calcium in your blood, bone spurs, calcium deposits may randomly happen throughout your body. All right? So too much calcium in your blood creates little tiny calcium pellets everywhere. Bone spurs aren't the only type of calcium deposit. A kidney stone is another example of this. But if you don't have enough calcium in your body, what ends up happening is you're mining your bones for calcium, and then over time you're going to get brittle, weak bones. And one of the conditions, osteoporosis, we're going to cover towards the end of the lesson. All right, so bone remodeling involves two processes: building your bone and breaking down your bone. So the process of building your bone is bone deposition. This is a review of a prior lesson when we're going over what osteoblasts and osteoclasts do. But just a reminder, bone deposition is when you're building bone using your osteoblasts. And when you're building, that means you're laying down calcium and collagen. Bone resorption is the opposite of that. It's when you're breaking down your bone to absorb the calcium. And in this case, we're using our osteoclasts to release that calcium from your bone and release it into your blood to then travel to your other organs so your other organs can use that calcium. So, what encourages more bone deposition or more bone resorption? Basically, because the more bone deposition you do, the more likely your bones will be stronger and denser so that your bones will stay tough and strong as you age. The less of that you do and the more bone resorption you do, the more likely your bones are going to become brittle over time. So, one of the things that will encourage more bone to be deposited is stress response. So if you put stress on your bones, that's actually going to encourage your body to strengthen your bones to resist that stress. So gravity actually has a pretty big impact on that, but also stress from exercise will also really have an impact on that. So if you put physical stress on your body through jarring exercises, contact exercises, exercises that involve jumping or fast movements, that's really going to encourage your bones to get stronger. This is a big reason why, for example, in karate, you might see someone strike a board over and over again. And what it actually does is when they strike a board or a dummy over and over again, that's actually putting stress on their bone on that part of their fist or that part of their knee. And that's actually going to strengthen the bone so that they're more able to create a stronger impact when, for instance, they might learn to break a board in half or something like that. Another thing that may happen and that we observe is astronauts. You don't really think about it, but gravity puts a lot of stress on your body. And astronauts, when they go into space for a long period of time, a year or more, when they return back to Earth, they actually have a measurable bone loss because they're in a weightless atmosphere to the point where their body goes, oh, I don't really need to maintain my bones as much, and then their bones get more weak. All right, so examples of stressful exercise that you can do to help increase the strength of your bones and add more bone deposition to it is running, jumping, and contact sports. And we're going to go over examples of that at the very end. But examples are like basketball, football, tennis, even, just anything where you're kind of asked to do sharp movements and strike something or push something. Lower impact activities like biking and swimming, what you're going to have to do in that case is you're going to need to do something that puts stress on your body, like physical weighted stress on your body. So maybe weight training is a good idea, and you want to kind of mix up your exercise if you want to strengthen your bones. So those low impact activities can still strengthen your heart and be really healthy for you, but if you want to strengthen your bones, you're going to want to add in weight training or running. And this is going to have its biggest impact when you're young, because basically after your 30s, you're now racing against your body, stripping away bone. Because after your 30s, it's a lot harder for you to take in calcium and absorb calcium through your diet. So you're much more likely to lose more bone than gain bone, or you lose more bone than you gain. So just over time, you're just losing small amounts. So another factor that encourages whether or not your bone is being added to or calcium is being removed from it, or other minerals are being removed from it, is just whether or not you have enough minerals accessible in your blood. Because phosphorus and calcium are really critical to a lot of functions in your body. Phosphorus is a key element in phosphate, and the ion phosphate is used in a lot of places. It's used to activate proteins and enzymes. It's used in the creation of ATP, so the energy molecule your body really needs and burns through a lot of, that has phosphate in it. And finally, phosphate, and thus phosphorus, is really important to the structure of DNA. So without phosphate, your body can't grow, it can't move, it can't really do a lot. And calcium is also critical, and you actually burn through a lot of calcium because your nerves and your muscles use a lot of calcium constantly. So calcium is used in your synapses to send signals between two neurons, and in your muscles, they're actually the element that helps trigger whether or not your muscles contract or not. But in addition to that, they're also really critical to your blood clotting, to secretion of stuff, secretion of digestive enzymes, secretion of hormones, secretion of protective tears and all that. And in addition to that, you do need calcium for cell division. So without calcium, your body's going to cease to run itself as well. So at the end of the day, what's more important, stronger bones or having calcium available? It's going to always be having calcium available in your blood, because when it's available in your blood, it gets pumped around your body and it's then available to all your other organs. Okay, so how we're going to regulate whether you're building bone or breaking down bone? Well, you have two hormones that are involved. So you have an organ in your neck. That organ is a mix of two sections, a parathyroid gland and a thyroid gland. So this glandular organ in your neck helps monitor your blood. And when it detects that there's too much calcium, then it's going to release calcitonin. So calcitonin is a hormone produced by your thyroid gland, and that's going to trigger the working and development and activity of osteoblasts, and it's going to block off the activity of osteoclasts. So it's going to trigger building. B, osteoblasts, B for build, osteoclasts, C for chewing down. So it's encouraging the buildup of your bones. On the other hand, if that organ in your neck, in the tiny section that's your parathyroid gland, detects that you don't have enough calcium in your blood, then it's going to release the hormone, very creatively named the parathyroid hormone, so PTH for short. And this PTH molecule is going to promote osteoclast activity, C for chewing down on your bones. So it's going to promote the chewing down of your bones and the release of calcium and block off the building of your bones. All right? And you're basically shifting back and forth between whether your thyroid is releasing hormones or your parathyroid is releasing hormones to determine whether your bones are getting stronger or weaker in order to maintain that calcium level in your blood. So we're going to kind of draw a regulation flow chart. This is a quick sum up of the prior notes, but you don't really need to write this part down, but I would write down D, calcium regulation flow chart, and that's going to be on the next slide. All right. So here's what happens. Let's say your calcium level drops. All right, that means we need more calcium to maintain homeostasis to get that calcium level back up to normal. So calcium level drops, our parathyroid gland releases PTH, and that's going to increase my osteoclasts and decrease my osteoblasts. And as a result, I'm going to have some bone loss, but what's really important is I'm going to have calcium added back to my blood. That's going to help raise my blood level of calcium back to normal. If my blood calcium level shoots past normal and gets too high, then my thyroid part of the gland is going to switch on, and that's going to release calcitonin, which is then going to allow osteoclasts to be blocked and promote my osteoblasts. So my osteoblast is going to rise, my osteoclasts are going to drop, and I'm going to start creating bone. And that's going to pack on calcium and make my bones stronger. So calcitonin leads to deposition, and parathyroid hormone leads to resorption. So I would draw this flow chart down. You don't have to draw the pictures, but I would draw the fundamental arrow movement as well as what's occurring at each stage. Okay, so growth involves the shape change in your bones, getting longer, getting wider. When we say bone remodeling, the shape of our bones stays the same, but what's really happening is you're just losing bits and pieces all over from your bones. Sort of like sneaking a little piece of a cake, but not enough that anyone notices a change in the cake. Something like that. Like sneaking a single pepperoni off a pepperoni pizza. If you only take a little piece, no one notices, but you did have a loss in what was there. That's what happens when you're removing bone through bone remodeling. But eventually, if you have enough diet calcium, as well as if you do enough exercise, you can patch up and replace most of that bone back up. So bone remodeling, shape doesn't change, but we are removing or replacing the bone over and over again, back and forth. All right, but if it shifts too much to the side where you're doing bone resorption constantly, when you're constantly removing your bone, then you're going to have effects on bone density. So bone density is a measurement of how strong, tough, and weighty the calcium and minerals are in your bones. All right, so it's the relative amount of minerals found in your bone matrix. The more dense your bones are, the tougher your bones are. Generally speaking, in your teens and in your early 20s, that's when your bones are at their densest. So it kind of seems like younger people tend to bounce back from injuries a lot quicker. I did a lot of stupid accidents and stuff. I would fall down things all the time when I was younger, and I seem to bounce back from it all the time. what ends up happening for a lot of us as we get older, so I have a lot of friends that once we reach our 40s and 50s, we're hurting ourselves over the stupidest things, like tripping over a sidewalk and we might break our ankle. And that's just a result of the fact that over time our bones get less dense. All right? What you can do to prevent that loss of bone density and to encourage as much density in your bones as possible while you're young is to promote and stimulate the activity of your osteoblasts. You can do that with diet, but you can also do that through exercise. All right? Soccer, basketball are pretty good. Strength training is pretty good. Running is better than walking. But even walking is pretty good than nothing. All those things are going to add stress to your framework that's going to encourage your bones to pack on more calcium to resist that stress. And then they're going to get stronger. And the more strong you make your bones when you're younger, the less likely that they're going to get fragile to the point that you're constantly getting injured and become disabled as you age. All right? Because basically by the time you reach your 30s, while you need to do exercise and diet to prevent your bone from completely breaking down, you're still gonna lose more bone than gain bone. And you're basically gonna start having bone loss starting in your 30s, especially if you're biologically female. All right? So, and the reason why that is because the amount of hormones in our body. Because remember, sex hormones are critical for bone growth and bone activity and bone osteoblast activity. So, unfortunately for those who are biologically female, if you are the female sex, estrogen is not as potent as testosterone, so already inherently our bones are less dense. And number two, estrogen drops off sharply in your 40s and then until you're in your menopause, and then at menopause it drops off even faster. On the other hand, testosterone declines very gradually in men, so at that case, bone loss isn't really noticeable and impactful, like to the point where it makes a real impact on their bones until their 60s. So if you are a biological female, you're actually going to have noticeable bone loss starting in your 30s, and it's going to get very noticeable in your 40s and 50s. And if you're biologically male, on the other hand, you're much more likely to not have any visible impact on your skeleton until after you're 60. Think about your grandpa and your grandma or any other older relative you have. You're actually going to start noticing your female relatives are going to start shrinking and have noticeable declines in their height starting in their 60s and 70s, but you probably won't notice much in your older male relatives, on the other hand, until they really start to reach their late 70s and 80s, generally speaking. But at the point you had so much bone loss that your bones are incredibly fragile and you can really disable yourself, that's a condition we call osteoporosis. Everyone has bone loss. But if your bones are already dense in the first place and you're doing as much as you can to keep the bone there, so even if you're getting bone loss in your 50s and 60s, exercise, diet, that's going to slow down how much bone is lost. But if you lose so much bone to the point where it's got basically just holes everywhere, we call this osteoporosis. This is where bone loss is at such a degree that your matrix is incredibly fragile and weak, and like very minor things like falling on your hip will break your hip. All right? So just an elder person falling down on the floor, that's enough to be really damaging to the point where they can disable themselves. So generally speaking, what you want to do to prevent osteoporosis as you age is to increase your bone density as much as possible when you're younger through exercise, through good nutrition. There are certain drugs that can affect your bone density, so just be aware of that. And you can't really do much about age or sex if you're biologically male or female, but being aware of your age and being aware of your sex and how likely you're going to be prone to osteoporosis will hopefully give you incentive to maintain that level of exercise and nutrition that you need to keep your bones strong. Because your strength of your bones, the more strong they are, the less likely you're going to have mobility issues as you age, which means you're more likely to be independent and not in a nursing home as you get older. All right. So, takeaways. We've gone over that the bones are a really important storage site for calcium and phosphorus, and that when you're young, that is the best time to store calcium onto your bones so that they're more dense. All right. because your body is constantly wearing away at your bone, and it will add bone back on, but that's really going to be encouraged through diet and the stress response. The mechanisms for adding calcium into your bones and strengthening your bones is through calcitonin, which is released when your blood calcium levels are high, and that's going to encourage the formation of bone. And the mechanism for releasing calcium from your bone and breaking down your bones so that you get calcium available elsewhere in your body, you're going to be doing that through the PTH hormone and osteoclast activity. All right? So we mentioned diet and exercise are really critical for helping to encourage more osteoblast activity than osteoclast activity, and that if you're not proactive about maintaining your bone strength, especially if you're female, you're going to be more likely to have osteoporosis and bone fragility and possibly disability as you age. So that it's just good to be proactive now that you're young. All right, so on that note, this concludes the lesson. Move on to any other work you have for the day. Bye.